This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. In today's episode, I speak with David Burkus, and we talk about how to use networks and networking to transform your business and life, and the 3 degrees of influence. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor. I'm delighted today to be joined by my good friend David Burkus. David is a best-selling author, a sought-after speaker, and associate professor of leadership and innovation at Oral Roberts University. His forthcoming book, Friend of a Friend, which will probably be out by the time you listen to this, offers readers a new perspective on how to grow their networks and build key connections, one based on the science of human behavior, not on rote networking advice. He's delivered keynotes to the leaders of Fortune 500 companies and the future leaders of United States Naval Academy. His TED Talk has been viewed over 1.8 million times, and he's a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review. David's latest book, as we said, is called Friend of a Friend, Understanding the Hidden Networks That Can Transform Your Life. And it's my great pleasure to have David back on here onto the Creative Life podcast. So welcome, David.
Oh, James, thank you so much for having me.
I think I'm really fascinated about you've been on the show before. It's actually really rare. I think I've maybe only had 3 guests before that have ever come back on the podcast.
All right.
I don't know whether maybe I've said something wrong but I was so keen to get you on this because I think, it feels like at times there's books, there's a little bit in the kind of zeitgeist of what's going on just now. And obviously we get Facebook, we hear about networks all the time, but I think your book is one of those things. So for anyone that just kind of getting into this, why should we care about networking? Why is networking an important thing for us to be doing? Why should is it not just good enough to do great work and put your stuff out into the world and that's enough?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your goals are, right? If you want to do great work and call it putting out in the world, but really pull like an Emily Dickinson and hide in your bedroom the whole time, and people don't realize your brilliance till after you're dead. That's a strategy. That's a strategy. But the reality is, I mean, especially for creatives, there's so much noise out there, and one of the things that we see is like there's almost no sort of like put it out there and then trust that it will go viral. Like everything that we look at as makes a big impact. Usually you've got help from your friends that help you sort of broadcast it out to their networks, and then it kind of compounds. So there is sort of a strategy and a tactic to that. The other thing that we look at from the standpoint of specifically to creatives and networks is that the network around you is also affecting your work, right? So it's not enough to do great work. If you want to do better and better work, you need to make sure that you're surrounded with the right people. We actually have sort of a whole chapter on the benefits of sometimes being siloed, being around a cluster. And we look at sort of Hemingway and the set in Paris, or C.S. Lewis and the Inklings, and even glass blowers in Murano, which is a totally different field than writing, right? But all of them sort of benefit from being around that community. So they matter not just in getting your work noticed, they matter in making your work better as well.
So you've written about, I've read your work in terms of creativity, you did work on leadership, on management. What kind of sparked your interest in this area of networking? Was there a particular story that you heard that you went, oh, okay, this could be an idea for a book here?
Yeah, I mean, it was born out of 2 things. It was born out of fascination with a certain thing and then frustration with another. The fascination was in both of my prior books, In the Myths of Creativity and in Under New Management, I wrote about this study from Brian Uzi and Jarrett Spiro about networks of Broadway shows, right? The teams that create Broadway shows. It's a fascinating study, and it made me really think like, okay, well, what else is out there? And I started reading a lot more from the world of network science, which is sort of a hybrid discipline of sociology and psychology and mathematics and all these things to study how networks work and how they operate. And over time, I'm seeing these insights because we've had sort of 50 years of research in network science. We found things that are universally true about all networks. Your network, my network, the networks of electrical grids, right, and computer systems, so even non-human networks. There's certain phenomena that are present in all of those networks. And then you look over into this world of, I call them the networking advice books. right? And they're good, they're decent stuff. I mean, How to Win Friends and Influence People is a perennial seller, right? And Never Eat Alone is a great book, et cetera. But they're all advice. They're one person's advice on how they built their network, and then you should do it too. And what I think happens for a lot of people is we read those advice books, then we go try and put that into practice, and we feel sleazy and inauthentic. And no wonder you felt sleazy and inauthentic. You're trying to be someone else, right? Because advice is autobiographical. So if you're implementing that advice verbatim, you're trying to be someone else. So the grand frustration to me is there's all of these insights from the world of networks, and no one over in the networking advice books is sharing them, right? There might be a couple studies they make a token reference to, and then usually sort of not even stay true to what the actual study said. But there's very little evidence in all of these advice books. And so that was really the goal. Was I think people don't need to learn another tip for how to craft an elevator pitch. I think people need to learn how the network around them already operates so that they can then figure out how to act accordingly.
And the first chapter of the book, you tell a story about a gentleman called Adam Rifkin, who Forbes named as the world's best networker. Now, when I suddenly think of that word networker, or someone that's a networker, I think of someone in a sharp suit, maybe a little bit sleazy, very good, very outgoing, kind of loves being in the middle of everything as well. But the interesting thing about Adam Rifkin, the guy that was named the world's best networker by Forbes, is he was like almost the exact opposite of that.
Oh, the total opposite. Yeah. I mean,
so could you tell us that story of Adam Rifkin? Because I think it's a really fascinating one to open the book with.
Yeah. So Adam is a fascinating individual. So I mean, a couple different things, right? Number one, he does not look like that tall, slick back hair guy pushing business cards in everyone's hand. Like he looks a bit like a panda bear, right? Like he's a big figure. And he sort of has this look, and he sort of moves a little slower. It just kind of looks like a panda bear. Wears a hoodie most of the time, and I guess he probably shies away from wearing like a white T-shirt and a black hoodie because that would just overemphasize it, right? But he also wears the moniker sort of proudly. Some of his companies even have the word panda in them, right? Because he's just sort of he's run with that idea. And in fact, the first time I reached out to him, so I'm not the first person to write about Adam Rifkin. Actually, Adam Grant, a mutual friend of ours, we both have come to know Adam. And Adam and I have come to know Adam Rifkin, which is really weird, but more on that later. The first time I reached out to Adam was when writing this book, because I remembered Grant talking a bit about him. He's the one that gets the sort of 5-minute favors thing. And I reached out to Adam, and he said, I don't really network anymore. And I was thinking, okay, you're the world's greatest networker. So clearly there's a disconnect here, right? And then you start sort of talking to him and interviewing him and figuring out what he does. And it's exactly that. If we define networking as running to a room, trying to meet strangers and convert them into something useful for you, right? A lead on a job or a sale or something like that, then yeah, Adam definitely doesn't do that. What Adam does is he's learned from his degree in computer science how networks work, and he treats human networks the same way that sort of computer networks work, which is he sees himself as the caretaker of this network in the Silicon Valley community. And he is, and that's how he became the most connected person, was not by trying to run up the count on just how many people he knows, but by saying, if I cultivate it and sort of caretake, if I'm the gardener of this network, of this community in the Valley, then good things will happen for the community, and they will eventually spill over to me. And that's sort of exactly what happened and how he became that person. But I think he's important because it proves the thesis that what most people don't need is to try and act like that slick back hair networker person. What most people need is to figure out how networks work and then do what is authentic and what is in response to the network they're already around, to put those ideas into practice in a way that's unique to them. That's how most people are going to get the biggest benefit and become a little less like those networker people and a little more like Adam Rifkin.
I was recently reading Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 book, and he talks about this idea of creating monopolies of one, where in such a crowded market, actually competition isn't such a great thing. And actually what you really want to be doing is creating a monopoly of one. And he talks about, gives different examples, but he mentions 3 things which are required in order to really dominate a market in a way. And one was proprietary IP. Another one was economies of scale. Another one was branding. And then he also said networking effects, or network effects was part of that as well. So is there a linkage between those people that you see that kind of rise to the top and their ability to network? Is there, we can feel it. We know people who are very successful and they're very good at networking, but I don't know what the kind of the stats are, the kind of the data behind that to support.
Yeah. That. So when he says network effect, he's referring to sort of a specific idea that a network develops more value the more people are connected to it. So the higher the number of people in the network, but also the higher number of connections internally. So as more people become connected, more people who are already there, et cetera.
It's like fax machine.
Yeah, no, fax machine is actually
the person that owned the world's first fax machine
was totally useless.
It was
right?
Such a great deal for them.
And then as soon as the second one comes around, suddenly there's some value, right? And it's the same way. What's interesting is that Peter Thiel had a front row seat. And in my opinion, one of the best examples of a principle from network science that is sort of how do you do the network effect when you can't just suddenly attract 7.4 billion people, which is the number of people in the world. And Peter Thiel was the first investor in Facebook. And Facebook actually did this somewhat unknowingly until they figured out what they did. If you remember sort of the history of that as a company, they were in Harvard only. Then they opened up to a couple other Ivies. And then they went sort of school by school until they had critical mass. And the idea and the thesis of that was that, okay, we need a network effect, but we can't go zero to everybody, 300 million people in the country. They'd already seen that happen with companies like Friendster and MySpace and that sort of thing. So they said, all right, well, we're going to go campus by campus. And originally, they did it to conserve server space, right? If you only open up certain campuses at certain times, you know exactly how many servers you need to add to the rack as you're expanding, so you don't go too big too fast. But the thing that ended up happening is that suddenly, within a day, when they went to Stanford University, I think it was within a week, the majority of undergrads had created a Facebook account, right? And then so they start figuring out that like, okay, there's real benefit into being seen as the immediate sort of network effect, the immediate number one player in a network or a cluster. Even though we're still in the minority of social networks on the internet right now, they looked like the most popular thing going on the campuses that they were targeting. And in fact, they'd later sort of play off this strategy even more. There's a story, we talk about it in Friend of a Friend, when they were trying to get students from Baylor University on board. There was an already existing, owned by the university social network that was encouraging students to use that. So what they did was they just decided they took every university in a 100-mile radius of Baylor University in Texas and opened up Facebook to them. The idea being they're like, okay, we can't go to this campus and be immediately present, but all of these people probably went to high school in and around this area. And so now they're going to see all of their high school friends sending them friend requests to be a part of this thing that they're not going to be a part of. Eventually, they'll be begging for it. And that's exactly what happened. And they were able to sort of drown that out. Now, why I think this is important for everybody, especially even creatives, right, is you can't, in today's world, you can't go from 0 to 7.4 billion people in your network effect who know what you are. It's just not possible. So you have to get really, really clear about what is my target audience? Where do they hang out? Where are the best places to appear like? And in fact, in the book, we call it's the network science principles called the majority illusion. Appear like I am in the majority, even though I'm not, because I'm targeting the most connected people in that little cluster that I'm trying to make inroads in. And for some people, that's all you ever need. That's the sort of Kevin Kelly, 1,000 True Fans idea. For some people, it's a starting point to then grow from there. But in both cases, it's vitally important to get really clear on what is that cluster and how can I appear to be almost more popular than I am leveraging that network effect. And like you said, Thiel had a front row seat to watch all of this. And so no wonder he reflects on it as one of the biggest things.
Which type of networks then do you tend to find provide someone with both fresh ideas, new ideas, but also with new opportunities? Because I know you talk about different types of networks in the book.
Yeah, so probably the phenomenon from network science that's I think is most relevant when it comes to ideas, and this is actually something that I sort of teased at when I was writing The Myths of Creativity and turned out to be sort of far more important than I knew, is generally there's a theory in network science called the theory of structural holes. And the idea is that networks are not egalitarian. They're not like a total grid where everyone's connected to everybody like, I don't know, like a piece of graph paper, right? They have nooks and they have crannies, and they have, if you've ever seen sort of a picture of somebody trying to draw out a network, you have different nodes, different distances away from each other, and some are clustered together and others are far apart. And that clustering creates a sort of gap between two different clusters. And Ronald Burt, the sociologist who pioneered this theory, calls that gap a structural hole. It's almost like if you think about gravitational pull and planets, right? What is between Earth and Mars? Space. Space is nothing, right? And so it kind of works the same way in networks. You have these structural holes that are created as people gravitate towards one cluster or another. It turns out that the people that generate the most value for the network as a whole and also for themselves are the people that act as brokers between these two structural holes, the people that connect these two ideas. In fact, Ronald Burt's best quote is that the people who bridge the gap between structural holes are at the highest risk of having great ideas, which I love that quote. Not only the idea of having a lot of great ideas, but calling it a risk as well.
A little bit similar to what Dr. K.H. Kim talks about in Boundary Crosses when she looked at these Nobel Peace Prize winners. The ones that got achieved the highest in terms of Nobel Peace Prize were the people that kind of were able to kind of cross between different things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Or it's also like you'll hear, I talked about this in Mystery Creativity, so do a lot of other people in design lingo. It's also that idea of being T-shaped, right? Of having a broad working knowledge of a lot of different fields. Even though you have your deep domain, the more you get to know those other fields that create the horizontal of your T, the more likely you are to be able to bridge those gaps, bring in ideas from that community, bring it to yours, or take your ideas to that community.
So is that a little bit like the difference between, we talk about those kind of deep networks within your field as opposed to being a connector between different fields or different industries?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And every field's a little bit different, so you have to sort of know how deep into your field you can go before you can be a vital connection, right? If you're just on the fringes of your field because you're brand new and you're already trying to yell at them and bring them all over to this other idea, that's probably not going to work. But as you get, I think what's tempting is as people get to know their field and get to become sort of popular in their field, there's a tendency to just want to stay the big fish in the small pond. Really, you're a small fish because you're still in the small pond. But there's that tendency to sort of do that rather than now is that opportunity. If you're connected enough, you have a certain sort of critical mass. Now is the time to actually be looking to other fields for opportunities for collaboration, new ideas, things you can steal, to be totally frank, right, and bring over to your cluster, all of which are going to influence not just yourself, but the cluster that you're in and the cluster that you're connecting other people to. It's a hugely important thing that networks need as a whole, and so it generates a ton of value, and that value has a spillover effect to you and your own career.
That almost reminds me a little bit, with someone like then a Richard Feynman, the physicist, or I'm trying to remember the name of the gentleman the neuroscientist who wrote The Man That Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Oliver Sacks,
where it almost felt like on purpose they switched disciplines after 10 years. They got really, really good at something. Then they kind of switched or moved into a slightly different discipline. And they seem to achieve a lot more because they went in a little bit with beginner's mind, I suppose the Buddhists would kind of call it. So they had all this knowledge from this other field. They went in with a beginner's mind, with a curiosity, and their eyes were kind of open to new possibilities. And they were willing to ask some of the questions that maybe people that were deeper in the field weren't willing to ask. Yeah,
no, that's exactly right. And in mathematics, there's another one by the name of Paul Erdos, who was famous for being a sort of intellectual nomad. So he had his sort of specialty of mathematics, and then he would show up. Usually he'd read a paper in another field and he'd go, oh, that's interesting, like another subfield of mathematics. And he'd go, that's interesting. I want to know more about that. And he would show up at the office or sometimes the house of one of the authors of that paper, and he would say, my brain is open. And he'd literally like move in or move next to that person for 2 years and collaborate with them. They'd publish papers together. In fact, Erdos is sort of the super connector of the network of mathematics. People trace where they are in academic mathematics based on how close they are to publishing a paper with Paul Erdos. And it's because he was constantly and intentionally switching to take on that beginner's mind and learn about a new field, but also be connected to the people in that new field, both of which unlocked a tremendous amount of value.
So from a meta standpoint, you're kind of been doing that with your own career as well. You're going from, you did the creativity, there was the management, you come from that world as well. I mean, you're going into the book you've written now is a book on network science. And I'm guessing there's probably other people that were scientists that specialized in network science and devoted their entire lives to network science. But so how were you treated kind of as an interloper kind of coming into this world? Yeah,
I mean, this is the grand theory of the book actually was, let me see if I can put the theory of structural holes into practice. Like if this works, and if the book really resonates and gets a message, which everyone listening, by the way, you can totally help us with that. If this works, the grand theory was that you have these network scientists who are in academia, and they are writing a bunch of incredibly fascinating papers. Some of them are even publishing books. Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler have a great book. Duncan Watts has 2 fantastic books. All of them are publishing these fantastic books, but all of them are, wow, look at these insights. They're fascinating. This is how networks work. No one's really bridging that gap and going, hey, you know who really needs these insights? People who are trying to figure out how their network operates. And instead, all they're getting is a rehash of how to perfect the perfect elevator pitch and the right way to introduce people. And none of it is based in the science, right? And so that's literally what I'm trying to do, is bridge that gap. And that's actually been, like you said, I wish I was as intentional about it as Paul Erdos or Feynman or Oliver Sacks. In reality, I just sort of have intellectual ADHD and I write about what interests me. But in all of them, I mean, I always make the joke that my goal is to tear down the wall or to bridge the gap between the ivory tower and the corner office or the co-working space or the coffee shop, like wherever work gets done. I'm trying to take evidence-based ideas that are complex but well researched and put handles on them and turn them into tools so that people can do their best work. And so the same thing here, and again, that's that theory. I'm trying to bridge two clusters. I'm trying to gap a structural hole myself, and if it works, that will be the reason why.
I'm guessing, kind of going into that position, I mean, someone like, let's say, like an Attenborough, he'll do a TV show about polar bears. And there's probably people who are maybe specialists on polar bears that maybe get a little bit cross. Like, I know a lot more about polar bears than that person, than that guy with that TV show. So have you had to deal with some of the kind of slings and arrows of kind of people saying, actually, you shouldn't be writing this book. I should, this is, what do you know, coming from a field, from a completely different field?
Yeah. I mean, it's been not as much as you would expect. I mean, one of the hidden advantages I have is that I'm not a journalist, right? If you think about sort of it's in writing, probably the most famous person to be a sort of social science writer is like your Malcolm Gladwell, right? Which in the academy, he does not have that good of a reputation. And the reason being that he knows he's got to oversimplify and sort of dumb down things. He also, there's a sort of a suspicion that he cherry picks his data. And so he ignores like failed replications when he wants to talk about how fascinating a study is, et cetera. But that's also because he's sort of a journalist. And so I think they get a little bit more. I've got the benefit of being sort of a recovering academic, right? I did not study network science at all, but I studied organizational psychology, which is one of the fields that sort of butts up against network science. So there's a little bit of a trust there that when I'm interviewing a lot of these people and writing about their papers, that I'll do a bit better job staying true to what the research actually says, because I have it. I mean, that's actually been my biggest fear in all three books, is that I might accidentally misrepresent one of the studies, right? And I care more about that than like getting a detail about one of the stories I'm writing about wrong. But doing that, because that, like you said, that sort of is a break of that trust, and then I end up being that. How dare you? Who are you to do this sort of thing? So, but it goes back to that thing that I was telling you earlier, is I think you've got to be deep enough in the community to be respected, and then you start bridging. I don't think you run up to that community and go, I'm going to connect you to this other one. I think they go, who are you? Get the heck out of here.
And as you were especially in the research phase of this, was there something you discovered about networks that really surprised you, and it maybe is pretty counterintuitive to how we think about networks and networking?
Yeah, so there are a couple different things that actually really surprised me. The first one is that Kevin Bacon is not the center of the Hollywood universe. So if you're listening to this and you're old enough to remember 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, the sort of game and the joke, I think it was even a Visa credit card ad for a time was playing off this idea. It's a total fluke of history. Some college kids were watching a bunch of movies that Kevin Bacon was in, and they got this theory. And in reality, Hollywood is such an interconnected network that you can connect pretty much anybody to anybody else inside of 6 Degrees. And in fact, if you rank actors and actresses by how connected they are to other actors and actresses, Kevin Bacon ranks 669th. Which is great news, because it means that you don't have to be Kevin Bacon to have a great network. Or I guess actually it means that you can be Kevin Bacon and still have a great network, because he doesn't. Interesting way to put that. It's good news for sort of everybody, because it does mean that we are truly that interconnected, and it doesn't depend on any sort of one person. What that means, I think, for the average person in their professional life, you're probably not going to suffer through 6 different handshakes to get to that one person that unlocks it. But when you look at the numbers, just people that are one introduction away from you are so plentiful in number. The odds are that the people that you need to further your career or do better work, et cetera, are one introduction away from you, just because there are so many people that are one introduction away from you. So that was probably the most fascinating insight from all of it is Kevin Bacon's not the center of the Hollywood universe, and that's good news for all of us.
Now, we're often told about this idea of creative clusters that, for example, in Hollywood, if you want to be an actor, you have to move to Hollywood. If you want to be maybe in New York, certain places you have to kind of go. And that in order to work with that network and to build that network and connect with that network, you have to move with the city where all the action's happening. Did your research kind of show you anything around that? Is that still the case, or has the effects of online changed all that?
Yeah, so it turned out that it's true and not true, right? So in Friend of a Friend, we talk about this. I call it the sort of seek out silos thing, because most of us, if you come from the corporate world, you're trained to think that all silos and clusters are evil. And then you got this phenomenon, right? That there are these creative clusters. There are spaces where this happens. What the science sort of seems to support is that these clusters are hugely important and you should probably seek them out. But you can't sort of build a life there, right? You can't stay there forever. And you see this historically too. I mean, I hinted at Ernest Hemingway earlier. Yeah, he moved to Paris and was in the middle of that community, but it was only for a couple of years and then he moved back, right? And you see it with other people treat their clusters as, okay, this is important, but we're not going to sort of meet regularly, right? We're gonna come, we're gonna interact once a week or every 2 weeks, and then we're gonna move forward. In fact, I write about Tina Roth Eisenberg and the Creative Mornings movement, which I think is a great example of saying, okay, you don't necessarily have to be in a certain city, but you do have to be connected to the people who are in your city. So once a month, we'll get the creatives in your city together for a less than half a day discussion over sort of breakfast. You'll make those connections, be in that cluster, and then you'll go your separate way. And that tends to be sort of the most successful people, the people that have a cluster to fall back on, but also kind of oscillate between that and going out into the world and putting their work out there in the world.
Now, one of the things towards the end of the book that you talk about is what influence that networks actually have on ourselves. And you point to some very interesting research around things like smoking and obesity. And as I was starting to read that, I was like, that makes complete sense. And I can start relating it to my own life, and you start seeing those things. So maybe describe what you found in looking at that, and how things like it's like your friends of friends, and how that can affect how you live your life.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating, right? That's why I wrote the whole book, was that I was fascinated by this stuff. So I guess it's a hyperbole to say that. But Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler are two of the most brilliant network scientists in the field. And one of the reasons for that is they have this phenomenon they call the 3 degrees of influence, right? So maybe you've heard like trite little phrases like you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, or show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right? And those things are true, but they're also untrue. They're true in the sense that we get influenced by the people around us. They're untrue in the sense that it's not just 5 people and it's not even your friends. So what they found looking at data that was a longitudinal study, which is a fancy word for it, it was studied over a long period of time instead of one snapshot in time. It's about a 30-year study of the network of Framingham, Massachusetts. And they're using this as part of a health study. So they're asking all sorts of health questions, but they're also asking social questions. And they end up being able to create a map of Framingham, Massachusetts, and showing how it evolved over 30 years. And what they found was that the first study was in obesity. What they found was that if your friends make you fat, not that if you're fat, you're likely to hang around with other fat people, but literally that the more friends you have that are obese, the more likely you are to develop obesity, right? And that effect actually extends out to not just your friends, but your friend of a friend and your friend of a friend of a friend, right? Even if you've never met them, because of the way that they are influencing your friend of a friend and the way that those friends of friends are influencing your friends, there's a spillover effect, right? So then they're replicating this study in smoking rates and happiness, which is the most fascinating one to me, that your friend of a friend of a friend, even if you've never met, has a 6% influence on your happiness, which sounds like, big deal, but your salary generally has about a 2 to 5% influence on your happiness. So this is a bigger deal than money. Right. And other people have run with this idea of the 3 degrees influence and replicated it in a bunch of different fields. And what we find is that you really are influenced by not just your friends, but the entire network around you, which is why it's sort of so important to be that the goal in networking isn't just to run up the count and to know as many people as possible, but to be deliberate about who you're interacting the most with, be aware of who they're interacting the most with, and sort of be aware of these influences. Because if you want to grow, if you want to get better in creating your work, or you want to get better at getting your work out there in the world, or even just want to be happier, these networks influence you in ways that we're only now becoming aware of. And I think it's important for everybody to grow and be more aware of how much influence is there.
You use a phrase towards the very end of the book. You say, your friend of a friend is your future, which is a really nice. I don't know if it's one of yours, or I think it was maybe someone else's phrase, but
it's me riffing off that line of show me your friends and I'll show you your future. It's not actually true. It's your friend of a friend is your future. Your friend of a friend is your future. Yeah.
No, as I was reading that, one thing that suddenly came to me was, I wonder then if many, let's say, health insurance companies are then using the same the same information about networks through machine learning, artificial intelligence, to estimate your income, your life expectancy based upon your networks, based upon your friends of a friends.
Yeah. So give it time. I would tell you that insurance agencies are both sort of arcane and also on the cutting edge of statistical research, right? So they were the first ones to think about actuarial tables and all of that kind of stuff. As soon as more research is done in this area and there start to be sort of hard, fast rules that you can count on the way you can count on actuarial tables, it'll probably be a deal, right? I mean, it actually amazes me in 2018 that, yes, whether or not you smoke affects your health insurance premiums. What's fascinating to me is that whether or not you live in a family of people who smoke, even if you don't, like that should affect it, right? And so the question shouldn't be, do you smoke? The question should be, how many people do you know that smoke, right? So that's easy, low-hanging fruit. That'll be sort of the first tip. And then we'll probably see a bit more. And, it's going to be a little weird. You're going to have the sort of Facebook level conversations about, is this too much information? Should it be more private, et cetera? But the truth is your insurance companies generally incentivize you to do things that are better for your life and better for your health, right? So while it might be a little weird, on the other hand, this just speaks to the importance of paying attention to this yourself, right? And the people that are around you. Your friends are your future, but your friends of friends are your future as well.
I think you need to get a copy of this book to Charlie Brooker, who writes Black Mirror, because I can imagine this being an episode in the TV series Black Mirror about our future as well. And actually, it reminds me, years ago, there was a Kickstarter, a crowdfunding campaign for a watch, which I got, which was you got this watch, and there was a website associated with the watch, and you'd put in things like your age, your zip code, where you lived, if you smoked, drank, all these things. And it would give you an expected date of departure from your life. And then that would go onto the watch, and it was essentially a countdown timer on your watch, it would count down how many years, days, months, minutes, seconds you had left. And I bought it. My wife was absolutely horrified that I bought this watch. And it was called, it was within our family, it was called the Death Watch. James is wearing the Death Watch. And unfortunately it didn't last very long because the battery only lasted 6 months, which is the downside.
Boy, that's ironic, right?
Which is very ironic. But I would wonder if there's maybe a new version, a version 2.0 that could take in your kind of network science and the theories and the things around that to give you a sense of like, okay, what's your estimated date of departure based upon your friends of a friends?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, right? So there's already websites that can sort of do that. You plug in the health data and it'll pull up that number. It'll even show you a little graphic of a tombstone with the day on it, right? Which is a little grotesque. Although, I mean, it's one of my buddies, Ryan Holiday, is a big fan of Stoicism and memento mori, and the idea that actually has a huge impact on how we live our life, right? So it's no spillover, or it's not too far fetched to think that those apps could actually start like, okay, now connect us with your Facebook account and we'll look at your other friends too. And then we'll give you an assessment. Now, I actually, in an age of Cambridge Analytica, I don't know if Facebook would approve that app, but the ability to do it is there, and that's freaky enough.
Well, this is a fascinating area. The book's called Friend of a Friend, Understanding the Hidden Networks That Can Transform Your Life. And Dave, it's my absolute pleasure having you on again. We'll also put a link here to the episode you came on and just kind of talked a little bit more about your life, and you gave some other kind of great resources there as well. And we'll also put a link to the book so people can go and check out that book. Probably by the time you're listening to this interview, the book will have come out. It'll be hitting the shelves really soon as well. But David, thank you so much for coming on today. Fascinating area, and I wish you all the best with the launch of this.
Oh, James, thank you again so much for having me. Thank you for sharing me with your friends who are now my friend of a friend. So thank you so much.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.